Good morning. Uh, I hope you all are having a good session so far. I kind of just joined this morning because I had to work yesterday and the day before that, but I'm here now, and I'm really excited. Um, if you're anything like me, you've probably thought various points, maybe during Zazen, like, yeah, I could give a Dharma talk. That'd be a great topic. Blah blah blah. Well, anyways, then Peter asked me to give one, and I was just like, ugh, oh no. Because it's one thing to have an idea about something, and it's entirely different to actually do it. And that applies to lots of stuff you may have noticed. But first, very excited because I always wanted to do this. Um, I wanted to start this talk by thanking and acknowledging Jane and Peter Schneider, my teachers. And also, I just want to say this talk is just to encourage you in your practice. And hat tip to Greg Fain because that's how he starts his talks. And I was like, "Can I do that?" And he's like, "Sure." I don't like own that intro. I'm like, "All right, cool." So, um, the topic I had for today is the gift of non-fear. Basically, at some point, I came across the concept of, well, there's four skillful means of a bodhisattva. And I'm not sure if this is part of that or if it's a different thing, but there's also a concept of the three kinds of gifts in Buddhism. And I had remembered it as like the three gifts of a bodhisattva or the four gifts of a bodhisattva. But then when I went to refresh my memory, none of them necessarily referred to that. But it is kind of, but it could be anyone really. Um, and at the end of the day, we're all bodhisattvas in training anyway, so this totally applies to all of us. But the gifts are material things, the dharma, and non-fear. And I'd sort of, since sort of coming across that, always kind of regarded non-fear as the most important. And I know sometimes it can be weird when you're coming up with lists to call out one as the best or just any superlatives in general. But now, when I was referring or looking up stuff, when I found references to this concept in a few talks by Thich Nhat Hanh and Roshi Joan Halifax, as well as Norman Fisher Roshi. Uh, they all said non-fear is the most important, so we're uh, we're in agreement on that. Um, and also, just as a side note, Norman Fisher calls it freedom, which makes sense because it's freedom from fear. But one thing that I found interesting was all the people that I looked up their take on it sort of referred to the gift of non fear as the greatest gift because it's what happens when someone has had deep realization of self or the true realization of reality, non separation, non duality, emptiness. That understanding, that sort of transformation, once that happens, fear drops away because all the sources of fear are almost to a point related to that sense of separation or any kind of sense of separation or walls of the mind, which we say in our Heart Sutra chant as hindrances. I tried to find the Sanskrit term, but I could not find it, which is fine because the Heart Sutra was written in Chinese, anyways, or was it? Anyways, but yeah, so and that makes total sense. When we chant the Heart Sutra and when we sort of it's sort of in a nutshell explaining what our path is as bodhisattvas and what then therefore we're working towards helping others to do. Um, and so that realization of non-separation is pretty fundamental to to just a Buddhist understanding. Um, I've heard it referred to as our birthright, and I really resonate with that. As sentient beings, and actually just as any aspect of the universe, um, it's it's our right to see ourselves, to see the self truly as completely not just connected, not like two separate things which are joined together, but as the same one thing. There's nothing in the entire universe or any of the omniverse, if we were going to include that, that is not just another face of ourself. And when you really understand that and understand the emptiness of sort of conditioned phenomena, um, then again, the basis for all the fears drops away. The sense of individual self, when you see it as an illusion, then the fears that result from that drop away. Just a real quick quote or reading from Red Pine's book, where he goes to the Heart Sutra, and then I'll sort of move on to a different subject, so to speak. He writes, so this is the section or the line, without walls of the mind and thus without fears. Oh, it's in here. Chitta avarana nastitvad atrasto. So chitta avarana was the thing I was trying to think of. Anywho, he writes, dwelling without walls, bodhisattvas see things as it is, to quote Shunryu Suzuki. We fear what we cannot see. Once the walls with which we have surrounded ourselves are gone, we see the indivisibility of things. We see the light. In the light of Prajnaparamita, bodhisattvas realize the birthlessness of dharmas. And once they are able to endure such a realization, there is nothing left to fear. Fearlessness is characteristic of the 8th stage of the bodhisattva path, which is essentially the last stage, as the 9th and 10th stages concern Buddhahood. Our fear begins with our separation from emptiness, and it ends with our reunion. Among the many fears that assail us, and there is one for every wall in the cities of our minds, there are 5 that are said to concern beginning bodhisattvas. The fear of survival, that we will not be able to survive if we practice generosity. The fear of criticism, that we will not be able to endure the criticism of associating with disreputable people while trying to liberate all beings. The fear of death, that we will not be able to give up our lives to help others. The fear of a bad existence, that we will be born during a time when the Dharma is not taught. And the fear of speaking before an assembly, that we will embarrass ourselves or fail to teach others. Yeah, that last one really speaking to me right now. Well, worst case scenario, it's my first talk, so no pressure. Or maybe lots of pressure, I don't know. So, again, I think that's really great, and I'm not disputing any of that. But I've been thinking this whole time about non-fear as being the most important gift for a couple other reasons. Mainly that it's not just what results from someone having deep realization, but it actually enables someone to understand deeply the profound nature of self. When someone is afraid, and I'll try and keep this focused on me. When I'm afraid, it is basically impossible for me to, in real time anyways, understand or see myself as connected with everything else. It's impossible for me to see, a car speeding towards me as, that's just another face of the true self, just as I am. No, 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 no. It's a car and I need to get out of the way. And that's good. The instinct of self-preservation is, well, we can't get rid of it. At least I hope not. Well, or if someone can, I hope they have lots of people to protect them. But we are animals, and among the many phenomena that arise in conditioned subjective consciousness is fear and the instinct of self-preservation. That's great. But then, like these walls of the mind, these concepts that we depend on for survival, their existence is tenuous at best, including the ego. And so if we can receive non-fear, if we can practice non-fear and also give non-fear to others, what we're doing is we're helping ourselves and we're helping others to lower those walls. When they're not necessary, they're actually oftentimes really unhelpful. But also on a more pragmatic level, and go along with me on this, think of when you're afraid, think of how it feels, and think of how your mind is. Um, I don't like horror movies. I don't like that genre. I appreciate lots of people do, and I don't think anything. I don't have any lower opinion of them. To each their own. I just don't like when I'm watching a horror movie. Basically, I'm like uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable for like an hour and a half stretch, and I do not like that. And I don't like watching other people acting out of fear. Um, I know just out in the world, I'll just find myself afraid of like a homeless person on the street. Like if they're walking towards me and they kind of like look a little, like unhinged, I get afraid. Um, and in general, like when I look around and see, oh my gosh, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, that's resulting from fear, and it also helps to reinforce fear, just as the walls of the mind and fear kind of go hand in hand. It's like a cycle, a self-referential thing. I have a very dim view of humanity when I'm afraid. Um, I have this like shortness of breath, and there's like a vacuum, like this, like the deep void behind my chest, and I don't like that feeling. Um, Roller coasters are okay. I don't mind roller coasters because that's not necessarily, I'm not afraid. I'm just excited. But maybe that's why people like horror films is they get afraid and then they get excited because it like jazzes us up, it keys us up, energizes us. We've got this, you know, we feel alive when we're afraid very naturally. Um, Anytime we reinforce that ego's notion of its own existence, it feels alive, and I think that's a really big trigger for us to feel afraid is when we, as a small person, as a small individual entity, have the sense that we don't really exist. Or maybe you could say when the ego feels threatened, when the ego feels like its existence is being called into question, the immediate response is, no, I exist. I promise. I swear I exist. Don't you dare make me feel like I don't exist. We have this deep, profound, foundational fear of like annihilation. And then, of course, everything kicks in to there. It's not just annihilation, but it's a complete fear of rejection, of separation, of absolute, complete, thoroughgoing exclusion. The entire universe is against us. And that's also why fear leads to anger. Oh, yeah, that's right. I was going to say a couple quotes that don't come from Dharma teachers. Or maybe they do, I guess, because George Lucas studied with Joshi Sasaki, at least for a time, or so I've heard, and heard that Joshi Sasaki was the basis for Yoda. But we all know that quote, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. I mean, fear is suffering. Any kind of desire, any kind of, separation, that's instantaneously a little form of suffering. They all kind of permutate, and they're all like variations on a theme. That's the thing about words is sometimes we say a word and then we'll refer to something and then we say a different word and then in our heads we're like, oh, those are two different things. They're kind of just referring to the same thing just from a different angle or shining the light at it in a different spot. So fear and aversion. Fear is like a very extreme aversion when you think about it. But anyways, then there's also another quote that I really like from Dune, which I figure is pertinent since that movie, the remake of Dune, just came out. Well, a few months ago. But it goes, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And when I was thinking that, I was thinking of how, again, as I said earlier, when fear cuts us off from the connection, from the deep, profound realization of self, or one mind, then it's like fear is the one mind killer. Uh, and I like that. Oh yeah, and then so another quote that I really liked is I don't know if any of y'all watched Game of Thrones, based on the Song of Fire and Ice books by George R. R. Martin, but there's a really very sweet scene between one of the characters, Ned Stark, and his son Bran, and Bran is like I don't know, like 9 or 10 at this point, but essentially he's talking with his dad about being brave, and he says, "Can a man still be brave when he's afraid?" And his father responds, "That's the only time a man can be brave." And I thought that was really sweet. Um, when we are afraid, we are not completely without the possibility for escape from fear. Maybe escape's not their best word, but non-fear. Reminding ourselves of the connection, evading the tendency or the temptation or that pull to act irrationally. If it's not a tiger or a car, there's a big chance that if we act out of fear, we're going to make a mistake, or at least we're not going to make things as we're not going to. There's a better outcome if we can subsume the fear and transcend it. So we can give ourselves the gift of non-fear. If we find ourselves afraid, we can do what we learn how to do in Zazen. Notice and acknowledge and face it. So if we're finding ourselves feeling hatred or anger, Western psychology tells us anger is a secondary emotion, which sort of, again, goes back to that fear of annihilation or fear of complete rejection, non-acceptance into the universe, into the family of things, as Mary Oliver puts it. But the thing is, even deeper than that sort of profound fear of the ego, of non-existence, is the real knowledge of complete connection. And that is the thing that we can actually rely on. And so, when I or someone else is talking about that profound realization of self or just understanding the truth of reality, it's that actual thing that you can rely on. That's basically emptiness, is because in some cases, or in a certain sense, emptiness just refers to the non-permanent notion that that the separation we feel, the distinction we see between any object and any other object is not so. Again, tenuous at best, and provisional, you might say. It's useful, but ultimately we can't rely on it. So fear, that gives us this like cognitive dissonance between the sort of ego's raison d'etre and our true nature or true reality. And so, and I think I already said something to this effect, to the extent that we can practice non-fear, and to the extent that we can give that gift to others, we are enabling the manifestation of deep understanding of our true nature, the true nature of the self. And then also there's all the other benefits, like we're not provoking someone else to act irrationally. If someone comes at us and they are afraid, if we can resist the impulse to become afraid ourselves, or if we do become afraid but we resist the impulse to act from that fear, then that's another version of not taking on someone else's karma. Then we're in a much, much better place to behave in a way that helps that person leave their fears behind, to give them the gift of non-fear. It's non-reactivity. We're staying inert. When someone's keyed up and we respond like, "Hey, it's cool. This is the mudra of no fear. Hey, I'm not gonna fight you. I'm not a threat. There's no need to fear me. There's no need to be afraid right now." Then we're helping that person, not feel that tightness. We're helping that person turn away from the shadows on the wall, to allude to the allegory of the cave by Plato. And open up rather than being cut off from true connection, the ultimate reality of the self. So I wanted to close with a quote that I found from Osho, which is simply, "Life begins where fear ends." That about sums it up, I think. Um, and so I didn't go on so long that we can't have some questions. If anyone has any, if you have the ability to use the raise hand reaction in your Zoom function, that's probably the best way. But if you don't, that's totally fine. Just like move your hand, and I'll try and keep an eye out in the little pictures at the top, and I'll kind of keep a lookout for that. The first question is from Dan. Hi, Dan.
Seeing a lot of each other lately. Question: how did you get over your fear of giving this talk?
I didn't. I'm afraid right now. Or maybe I'm not afraid. I'm definitely anxious, and anxiety is like diet fear, if you think about it. So, yeah, I guess I could have gotten over it better by putting a lot more time and effort into actually like writing it out and then reading it word for word. I know that really works for Peter and Jane, and I thought about doing that, and I was like, no, I kind of want to be a little extemporaneous, more like the San Francisco Zen style. That's what they do, and I was like, I want to do that. So, maybe next time I'll do it differently. Now that I've had a chance to try it out, and I'll keep trying stuff that I feel like I want to try until I find a better groove.
And what was your greatest fear that you overcame?
Just in my entire life?
Yeah.
The greatest fear that I have overcome. The first thing that pops into my head is moving to Los Angeles. I remember just kind of being terrified when I was, packing up my stuff in Tucson, Arizona. I'd gotten my bachelor's in theater, and I was moving out to LA, and I was really just stepping into the unknown, which that's a very common theme, is fear of the unknown. I like Red Pine had said. And then also a similar thing with going into the Navy. It's kind of hard to say which one was bigger than the other, but yeah, anytime I've decided to just completely go somewhere different than what I'd known, um, those are pretty big fears. And I don't really know what it means to overcome a fear other than just resist being dominated by the fear. And so, yeah, just like Ned Stark says, being brave, you can only be brave when you're afraid, and bravery is a way to transform fear into non-fear, or it's the way to meet it. Or as Muad'Dib says, facing it and then watching where it's gone, which I liked because turning the eye inward, that sort of reminds me of Dogen vibes, and watching where fear has gone reminded me of the whole like what birds can see the traces of other birds. Well, in the human world, if we look, we can see the path of fear where it's gone through our experience, through our lives, and where it's going right now. We can practice looking, practice noticing. We could see it coming. Sometimes we can turn away, sometimes we can't, as with many things that come about from Zen practice. So thank you. Matt.
Yeah, I just moved yesterday, so I'm going to be speaking in slow motion, and if I get lost in what I'm saying, be patient. Thank you, Chris. That was a great talk. Years ago, when I was in college, I had the good fortune to come across a book when I was wandering through the library called Landscapes of Fear. And it was a study done by a sociologist who did a very interesting breakdown on types of fears and the circumstances in which they arise. I don't have the energy to address it very much, but I want to make uh, offer some distinctions that I can't recall whether they came from him or they were things that I just realized during the course of my life. But there's the immediacy of fight and flight, which is you mentioned tigers. You know, you come across a tiger. That's when the adrenaline glands kick in, and you simply respond as quickly as you can, and that fear drives you to flee or to fight. Then there's the fear. There's anxiety, which is there's no immediate threat like a tiger, but there is a fear of bodily harm. There are different types of anxiety, but there's fear of bodily harm that can come to you at any moment. There's a different kind of anxiety. There's social anxiety, which is the fear of being ostracized or shamed or miscellaneous, criticized, and then there's basic, fundamental aversion, which kind of covers anything that is, you might call fear or dislike, and that can be either bodily aversion or psychological aversion. You may have a bodily aversion to a certain kind of food, but psychologically, it's if it's presented to you, you eat it without fuss. Your body isn't thrilled because your taste buds are in relation to your brain doesn't like the taste, but it doesn't. It's not a source of concern. My experience in life has been that the anxieties, the anxieties that are social anxieties, and the anxieties related to being in a state of feeling like I'm walking through a minefield because of my physical health issues that have cropped up with some regularity during my lifetime. Those fears become ingrained and a part of bodily tension that's perpetually there, that gets thankfully released during as a result of Zazen and becoming mindful. They do come back, at least for me, and I've certainly never released them in any kind of entirety. But there are layers upon layers that can be there. It's a bit like an onion, and I've found that my journey through my practice has been that the layers peel off, and sometimes they peel off in huge numbers at once, and sometimes one at a time. But the Fui. I just short circuited. If it dawns on me, I'll raise my hand again. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I had heard numerous places. I've heard essentially that our minds, in terms of from uh, in terms of our psychology, our minds can't tell the difference between a threat that we are actually facing, where it's getting sensory input from eyes, ears, nose, etc., and a threat that we are sort of imagining, like, if we're about to go speak in front of a crowd and we're sort of just overwhelmed by this whole like vague, abstract, I am about to die sense, which is completely irrational, obviously. But again, that's what it comes down to. And Linda Gallion, in a talk that she gave, she was talking about how like any kind of like some of the first memories we have are when we felt singled out, and how those experiences really go deep, and we've got like a deeply ingrained reflex to avoid such experiences, which totally makes sense because the human species survival over the thousands, tens of thousands of generations was absolutely enabled, made possible by our coming together and working together and living in community. And so naturally, anyone who is just like totally fine being excluded from the group, those people died off at a higher rate, I think, than other humans. That's just my sort of armchair, evolutionary psychology uh, hot take. um, so, take that with a spoon of salt. Michael?
It's interesting that you chose your talk because I've been recently dealing with what I consider fear and stuff. Because as I get older, and like Matt, I'm dealing with medical problems that doctors are scratching their heads about and stuff, and they're threatening, but they're nothing really dangerous. But I've spent my entire life when I was younger challenging my fears by having life threatening hobbies in climbing and skydiving and ice climbing and all this other stuff. And I kept wondering why I was doing these sports because I loved them. And I think it was to find out what are the parameters of fear and their role. And there is fear that is necessary to live by, in the sense that, yes, you're not going to step out in front of a car because it's going to hurt. Or, if you're in a dangerous situation, which I went through as a climber and a skydiver and stuff, and had things go wrong, that fear kept me from freaking out and stuff. But then there's the fear of, like you say, you hang on to it. And, there's enough things going on in society right now that we can be upset by and fearful of and stuff. And I'm just thinking, do you see that there is a difference between a fear that's a tool and you only use it as long as you need to? And then once you're done, boom, you throw it away and get back in life. And then there's useless fears that you can't do anything about anyway. So you need to, get rid of that attachment to that fear. Because sometimes I think fear makes us feel like we're alive. We're involved with life. And that's a silly notion, but we seem to do it, and I do it. And so do you see that there is a useful form of fear? I get that impression from your talk, but I wasn't sure I was perceiving that correctly.
Yeah, I would say so. Um, in sort of a yeah. I don't think that's I think that's basically true. Is in some circumstances or in some ways, fear can be useful, or maybe certain kinds of fear can be useful. One thing that popped up while you were talking, and uh, man, the topic of fear is really big. I could probably do a whole other talk at least on it. Maybe if I if a little bit more time. Uh, yeah, I'm really bad about procrastinating. Okay, said I wasn't going to say anything about that. Here we are. See how like I'm starting to like try and when I get nervous, which is again like a form of fear, and I start talking too much and just anyways.
We're all going to talk bad about you behind your back, so go ahead and do it
Ah,
anyway.
perfect. Now that we've taken the air out of that whole inflatable elephant. Anyways, yeah, the thing that sort of popped up in addition to, again, the car or the tiger example, and the tiger I keep saying because that was Suzuki Roshi's whole thing, was if there's a tiger coming at you, get out of the way. So I've noticed like fear can be one sort of maybe benefit, if you can think about it that way, of fear is that, we try and stay in the moment. Well, when you're afraid, you are like so only in the moment. Like when you when I'm like I work on a shipyard, so sometimes if I'm maintaining a healthy fear that something that someone else did was not the way it should be. That's why every time I take my electric multimeter, if it's in the position to check electrical resistance and I put it on live voltage, it'll blow up. But if it's on a position to check voltage, it won't, because someone smarter than me designed it that way. So anytime I'm about to check for voltage, even if it's something as small as like 120 volts, I put one of my leads on one end, then look and say volts AC. Look at the knob, volts AC. Put the other thing on. And then, 480 volts. Good thing I made sure to check that the setting was right. Yeah, that's a great use. That's a very useful relationship to fear. And just again, in general, like, if I'm like standing really close to the edge of a ship and like a breeze hits my face kind of odd, and I get that like, and I'll just be like, oh, and then I'll be completely in the moment, and while appreciating that in the momentness, also reminding myself it's okay, gravity's still pointing down towards the center of the earth, not sideways. Oh my god, driving into Tassajara. When I was learning how to drive the stagecoach, Mako Volkel, who was the director at the time, was just reminding me, there might be a very sharp drop off to one side as you're driving through the mountain, but gravity's still pulling you down to the road. So, drive carefully and and meet your fear rather than letting your fear take you on a ride. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome. I moved the view window over so I can see Sandy, Beth, Rachel, and Joe, just to see if you guys had anything you wanted to say or ask. Okay, Sandy, I see you raising your hand.
Nope. Moment, please.
Yeah.
Our time is is running out before we have to stop. So whoever continues now, please keep it more brief so that we can finish on time.
Okay.
Oh, Chris, I just wanted to say, I came partly in ways. Well, I came in a little late to your talk, but I wanted to thank you very much. It was very, very, very good and very right at the moment. What I liked the most was that when I came in, you had almost stopped reading and you had started just speaking. And when you speak from yourself like you did, the talk was, there was much more in the talk, much more of you in the talk. And it hit home because I'm going through that same thing, looking at my fears and trying to see, where they come from and if I can accept them and release them. And I realized they go all the way back to my very first memories in elementary school. So I wanted to thank you for opening up like that. It was a wonderful talk. And I guess I should shut up and let other people do their short talk little thing. But thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandy. Matt, did you remember that really quick thing that you wanted to mention?
There's an interesting paradox that practice has really made glaring for me. You may have brought this up during your talk. If you did, I'm going to have to repeat it because my attention span is a little bit limited. so I missed large chunks of the talk. The paradox is fear of fear, and it sets up a real conflict, because what happens is we become as we become more and more aware of our fears, at least for me in practice, I've become very, very averse. I've noticed my aversion to my fear, my fear of my fear, and it's there's this conflict that has been exacerbated just by its prevalence. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Thank you. And we are a little bit over, so Peter, I see your hand raised. How about you
Yeah,
bring
sure.
us home?
Mine be good and short. Yeah, in the beginning, Chris brought out, without any hint, I think he said that, not the same translation maybe, without any hindrances, no fears exist. Okay, and that's the point. So what are hindrances? Hindrances are the things that support the small self. They can be, of course, the avarice and aversion and not caring of the three poisons. But basically, it's the fear is always there to its source is the small self, and it's at a moment when we don't accept that, and that makes everything smaller, and it contracts. And so every time we have a fear, mostly, and of course, once again, there's tiger fear, but you have a fear, it's yourself is involved. So you can the self, the small self, is of course a part of us, and is part of our survival, but it's also can't be trusted so much. And if you don't have, if you're not involved in self, then you won't have fear. Is my take on it. My hand should be up for Jane here. Jane, what do you got to say?
Oh, I didn't really want to say anything so much as thank you, Chris. I appreciated many of your insights in this. So I hope you'll come to Doksan this afternoon so I can continue. But anyway, everybody, your questions are very good and your comments are very interesting. So if I'm doing Doksan this afternoon, if anybody wants to have Doksan, please put your name in the chat and your number.